Hello and welcome to Supervision Simplified. I am your host, Valarie Harris.
And I am Dr. Amy Parks.
And today we are going to be interviewing the Dr. Amy Parks to find out all sorts of things that we don't know. And she doesn't know what question she's being asked. And I think that's kind of fun, although I don't know if my questions are going to be fun enough to be on the spot ones. They might be too basic, but you can always send us your questions and I can always pull a second interview with new questions. So just FYI. So the first question that I had was, can you tell us what inspired you to come into this field, whether it was like a person or a problem or an event or a goal, or kind of like what was the inspiration for pivoting in this way, like in your younger years, not like the CSD part, but prior to?
Yeah, so it's funny because I know your origin story and mine is so different and funny. So I grew up in an all-girls school. I went from kindergarten to 12th grade to an all-girls school. There were 47 girls in my class, and we did not have a school counselor. There was no such thing. And I went to undergrad and I was a triple major, which is sort of gross, and majored in English, psychology, and education, which is an interesting trifecta if you think about that sort of combination of things.
Yeah.
And went on after undergrad to be a teacher, so an English teacher. So think about that combination, like the psychology of that, education and English, right? And I taught middle school English for about a year and a half. And I remember talking to a fellow teacher, friend of mine who I had graduated from school with, and said, I really like teaching English, but I really like talking to the students more about their parents and their parenting, like the problems they're having with their friends. And like, I like that so much more than, like teaching English.
Uh-huh.
And she said, well, why don't you become a school counselor? And I'm like, well, what is that? Like, is that a job? I didn't even know that was a job.
Wow.
I had no idea because I had never had one.
Yeah.
So I had no concept that was a career choice. So I literally immediately that day enrolled in grad school and went to grad school and then became a school psychologist and a school counselor, because back in the day, you could be dual licensed in both career fields. And so I started and became sort of what I am today from this idea that I didn't even know the career I have now was a thing.
Wow.
Which is kind of cool if you think about it, that maybe 30 years from now, there will be people doing jobs that they don't even know are jobs.
Yeah.
But I was always sort of in my mind creating a career field that was a vision. Like I've always been a visionary. Like I always envisioned a career field for myself. So I was crafting something, but I didn't know it existed. And when it did, I was like, oh, it was like, oh, yeah. My God, that's always what I wanted to do. I didn't even know it. And then all of a sudden someone said, well, why aren't you this? And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even know that was a thing.
That is so interesting. And as you say that, like the visionary piece, it really does have me wonder, as you say, crafting. And, even when you talked about mine, like I had the dual major with the arts, so like you, like, wow, triple major, that is badass for one. But it is this idea that I kind of am curious now. I wonder if that's a visionary thing. You know what I mean? Where you're constantly, because it's hard to just stay with the one thing, because you have ideas and innovating and wanting to make things better or different. If I'm curious if people often end up in their career by hitting different things at different times and like bringing them together. Like my practice feels like it came together from working in a treatment center and in a psych hospital And then, so I see what you're saying, that, and that's, now I'm curious if that's a visionary type path. So that's really, really interesting. How did you get from that to then group practice? Like, were you in a solo practice first? Did you accidentally end up in group practice like I did? Like, did you
Yeah,
resist
so
it?
that's also, I blame that on Joe Sanok, so our mutual friend Joe Sanok. So I remember walking on the I was talking to him on the phone, and I remember walking along the sidewalk. I was like walking and talking to him, and I was in private practice at the time, and I said, Joe, I have more people calling me than I have capacity. And he said, well, why don't you start a group practice? And I'm like, no way. Like, oops, sorry. I was like, no way. I don't want to manage people. I don't want to do that. And he said, I'm not sure you actually have a choice. He said, or you're just going to turn all these people away. And so I said, well, I don't think I can do it. And I said, well, and he said, well, you can, like, you don't have to, but you could. And so that was sort of the invitation, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a little hard to turn down at the time. So I took it, and it has been an amazing ride. So yeah, so I it was really came out of the fact that I had just way more people than I could manage,
Mm-hmm.
that wanted to work with me, and and really also my kind of constant idea in my mind that I have always loved teaching. So even from like those early days as, in undergrad of wanting to be an educator, like I've always wanted to be the person that extends the legacy. So like really I've always wanted to be a teacher, and always will always continue to teach. And so to bring somebody along on the ride is, it will constantly and continuously always be my thing. And so to say to a younger, like a clinician that is a new career, not necessarily younger, but an early career clinician, to say, hey, listen, I'd like to support you, and here's how, has always been my thing. So it kind of became an opportunity that I couldn't turn down.
Yeah. And can you tell us what parts of it have been the most impactful in just in shaping who you are, even as a clinician or a visionary, or even future, the future versions of yourself that are either developed now or are in development? Like, which parts of, like, being an educator and having a group practice, and like knowing that you're an educator too, like, how does that play into that? How has it shaped things for you?
I think the most impactful moments of what I have done and what I do are when someone says to me, like the phrase comes up, like, I remember when you told me this,
Ah, yeah.
or, oh, this is an Amyism, like, or a Dr. Amyism. Like I'll have people, like students that I've had in the past. I teach at 3 universities, and I'll have people say to me, oh, you told me this in the past, or, oh, I know Dr. Amy always said this would happen, or, I remember you told me in supervision 10 years ago that this and this has always stuck with me. Or like my clinical director was my supervisee when they began their work,
Hmm.
many years ago, and they will often say to me, I remember in supervision, this was something that you said to me. It was very. So I would say that of any of the things that I've ever done, that is the most meaningful. So if we're talking about like meaningful impact, that's probably the most meaningful, impactful thing, for me. And then I guess in terms of community impact, or how that impacts me, but I think for my ability to impact others, um, outside of outside of what I'm able to do, I think too, what I see my ability is to be able to change in my work, to be able to change how parents see their kids. And
Yeah.
so, because my work is centered around working specifically with children and teens and parenting. And so for a parent to come in and say, and I often do like projective, like visionary work, like I say things like, So what I'm looking for in the future for your child and your relationship with your child is this. And they're like, oh,
Mhm.
well, that will never happen. And I'm like,
Wow.
maybe that won't happen. However, or I say, and I have seen it actually happen many, many times. So I'm going to hold this vision for you, and you don't have to
Yes.
hold it right now because it's pretty heavy, but I'll help hold it for you. I have the capacity to hold on to this for you. And then, a year later, they'll say, you told me that so and so would not tantrum anymore, after we learned these skills or whatever. And I'm like, mm-hmm. And now look, here we are. And I think that's the most fun impact,
Mhm. Yeah. And I have a burning question because since you as a parent myself and you're a parent, but also the owner of a practice that focuses on children and families. So what do you believe is the most misunderstood part about raising kids in general? Like what do parents most misunderstand about that journey or any part of that? So that's one question. So I'll let you answer that first and then I'll ask the next
Most misunderstood thing about raising kids is that parents don't have to do any of their own work
one.
to support their kids.
Amen to that. Yeah. Oh yeah. Or that their stuff will never unpack their kids because that's
Right.
different.
Right. So, I mean, the number one thing we deal with on a minute by minute daily basis is that, and I'm just as guilty as anyone else, but that that we are not part of the problem for kids. And we very much are. And therefore we are required to be part of the solution.
Yes.
And,
I love
and
that.
so, that there's no dropping your kid off to therapy and expecting them to be fixed while we're at the grocery store. It just doesn't work like that.
Oh,
And that doesn't mean that we're not, our kids are not autonomous beings, but there's absolutely no room for us to just disconnect from parenting and to just say that we don't have any responsibility to the work.
yeah. No, very true. What do you think, or is there a stage of parenting that seems to be the most difficult? I mean, obviously, from a trauma narrative, I can think of like, I'm like, well, it depends on the parent's trauma and what they haven't resolved and what it brings out. So I don't, that would be my frame, but my clinical frame is different from yours. So I'm curious from your lens, what stage seems to be the most difficult for parents and or for children also? Like where they just are missing each other. Obviously, we know the teen years can be hard, but I'm telling you, there are times that I felt like parenting a teen was far easier than parenting like an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old. So I imagine it's not just the teen years.
It's so interesting that you say that because I would give you three different answers at three different stages in my own life.
Uh-huh.
So when I was a young parent, I would say one thing. When I was an older parent of older kids, I'd say something else. And now, or from the framework of a professional, I'd say something else. Now, as a grandparent, I'd say something else.
Ah,
So now in my whatever grandparenting wisdom, and I think probably this is the right answer because I think my other answers would have been clouded by a different perspective.
sure.
I think the answer is based on your own capacity as an adult, as a
Hmm.
human. I don't think it has really anything to do with the developmental stage of the kid.
Yeah.
I think if you're tired or you don't have capacity, any stage sucks.
Yes.
It just does. If you are tired or your expectations are misaligned with what is presenting, then it sucks. It's
Yeah.
horrible. And you hate it. And you hate your kid and you hate life and you hate being a parent and it's horrible.
Yeah.
And that can be before you're a parent, that can be in utero, that can be when your kid is born, that can be when they're 5 weeks old, that can be when they're 15, that can be when they're 45.
Hmm.
That can all be true. So I think that, but I would have said something very different when my kids were, 5, 4, 2 and 1. Like, like I have 4 kids. When they were all different ages, like, but they were close, I would have said something very different. And then when they were teenagers again, I would have said something different. But I just really think now it's very much dependent on how you feel about, like, how you as a parent, how you as an adult, like human,
Yeah.
like approach it. Because if you don't, if you have a bad, if you're having a bad day, it's going to be bad.
Hmm.
I don't know. Maybe that's the wrong answer. I don't know. I
No, that
just,
all makes sense, because when I think back on like the more difficult parts of my parenting journey for me, they were, or even in just my relationship with my husband, or when I reflect on watching others. So, for instance, when you have the friends that don't have the kids, but you have kids, and then they're having kids, but your kids are older, and you're like, let's watch and see what happens. You just reflected and I think Gabor Mate says this too, like it's the stress. I think it's the stress in the relational strain and just the mismanaged stress in general that then
yeah,
comes out sideways and disrupts all the co-regulation that's supposed to be happening and all that connection, and makes it just like makes it exponentially more difficult and makes a lot more misattunement happen.
yep.
And so I agree with that. Do you have any strategies on how you would, it seems like these current generations are deciding not to have children more and more often. But I think in some ways I wonder like what could be done to help parents be more equipped to have to raise children, because they say there's never a perfect time, but at the
Well,
same time, like there seems to be this, you need to have a realistic idea of what parenting needs, like what kids need, even though you don't have all the things or else are running the risk of setting up for something like that.
I mean, I think a lot of professionals would say we should go back to a time where we are doing more shared parenting, where more parent people are working together as families to share parenting. And I recognize that that may be a privileged place to say that. Um, and I understand many families are, having to have dual income homes, and maybe they don't have family nearby, or lots of reasons that might not be able to happen. And then again, there might be reasons why that is actually an opportunity for a family to be able to be together.
Mm-hmm.
um but I think the more hands you have, the easier it is, and it's going to be for people to be able to have capacity to be able to, I mean, when we were talking in your interview, we were talking about it just makes your work easier if you have capacity. So
Yeah.
anything is easier in life if you can manage yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And I
so,
don't know, like I didn't have extended family growing up around me. And we had limited extended family with our kids, and it did make a difference. And sometimes the gaps were filled by our neighbors, that went to church with us, like, and those were backup dads and backup moms or coaches, or and I think of like the impacts those people have had in my kids' lives have been monumental. And so even if it's like you said, the shared parenting from a family system, I think even the community system, like even if there's a way to wrap around and have more of a communal sense of ownership, the whole village mentality around children and their well-being, I think that can really be instrumental for a lot of people. I know that when I was a parent of teens, that was a very big deal to me, was to be the home where they can all come and pile in and develop those relationships underneath you. And you can show up for those kids that don't have the parent or the home to be able to do that. So, as when they were little, though, I did not have the capacity to be that mom. I was looking for the house to send them.
right.
So but even having these conversations, like, where's a candid parenting book, Dr. Amy Parks, that just says, hey, here's how you know your capacity is missing. Here's where you go. Maybe you should start these little groups and ask friends to, maybe you and Mackenzie could get together and solve some of these. Because I think you're absolutely right. So in managing this and teaching at a university, which that's 3 universities, which is totally a lot,
Well,
Then
I don't
comes
actually teach at the same time at all of them. So,
still,
I,
that's still a
right.
lot to manage. I know I taught at one and it was a lot to manage. Then comes the CSD. So tell me what were you doing when you were like, that's it. I am going to create this. I don't know how. And like, what was that moment like? And then what was the vision? And then tell me a little bit about the next steps once you determine that.
Yeah, so I have to divide my week into half. So because I have to do like group practice one half of the week, and then I own the Clinical Supervision Directory, and that's like another half of my week. But one of the things I've discovered is I run my group practice much more like a business, and I need to start running the Clinical Supervision Directory more like a business. So it is a business, and it deserves the same business attention. It
Mm-hmm.
has it has it has so much potential, and it's really exciting, and it is a very strong product, and I'm really proud of it. And so during the pandemic, like
Mm-hmm.
all of us, I had a little bit of creative juice that wasn't getting squeezed, and so I guess I was just thinking about how hard it was for so many people to find supervision and really to connect with supervisors. And I was, talking to my own supervisees, and we were just sort of reminiscing about our challenges about finding supervision. And I really looked around a lot. I really tried pretty hard to find the ways that people connect with supervisors. And I just was just bumping into walls over and over and over and over and over. And I thought, I can't imagine, I can't believe no one has really done this. No one has solved this problem. And a couple people kind of had tried, but no one had really done a robust, decent job of doing it. And so I just thought, well, I'm going to do this. And I even told my accountant, like, this isn't a real business. Like, I don't really need like an LLC for this, do I? And she's like, yes, you do, dummy. Of course, yes, you do. And so I found a developer who developed this directory, and I said, I'm going to be the person. Well, actually, I first said, I'm not going to be the person. I'm not going to be the supervision person. I don't want to be supervision girl.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sort of turned into supervision girl. So, but now I feel really excited and proud to be the supervision person. I know how to become supervised in every state in the United States. We have a guide that is coming out early this summer on literally how to become how to become a supervisor in social work, in counseling, and in psychology in every state in the United States,
Impressive.
which is going to be really exciting. You can connect with a supervisor in any of those domains in through this clinical supervision directory. We've connected with all 660K CREP accredited universities in the United States to connect them with supervisors. I just got some stats from my team earlier today, and we had 200 people, 200 clinicians that are supervision seekers sign up just in the month of April to look for supervisors. So
Wow.
we're constantly looking for supervisors to connect with our directory. And, but it is like fishing in the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, or, like in a big ocean, because we have a lot of supervisors that need to, that need to show up for the next generation of supervision seekers, but not just for them. We want supervisors, and I know that you and I have this agenda in mind. And one of the reasons why we started this podcast was because supervisors, maybe not every supervisor has the agenda of showing up for the next generation of supervision seekers. But what we do know is absolute fact is that supervisors need to show up for each other.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, yes.
Because what we know is absolute fact, and one of the sort of initiatives that sort of came to me while I was like ruminating over what we needed to do with the supervision directory to build it and to grow it. The revelation came to me that supervision is so critical to training the next generation of clinicians in a professional way, and supervisors are unsupported because they are at the top of the clinical
Yes.
pyramid.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And so the initiative of the Clinical Supervision Directory, and we're going to be in partnership with several different organizations, and we'll be announcing a lot of those initiatives over the summer. In partnership with several different organizations throughout the United States, we're going to be piloting a number of different opportunities for supervisors to connect with each other, because we need to be, and that's what Supervision Simplified is all about, we need to be supporting each other and talking to each other. And
Yes.
case consulting with each other off of Facebook. Thank
Yeah,
you very
God,
much.
please.
Because that social media is not a place to do appropriate
Never.
case
I'm just venting.
consultation.
No, you're not. You're trying to do a case consult. Stop it.
That's not a place to do that.
Mm-mm.
And really a place to, having a place like the Supervision Summit, which is happening in 24 hours, from this interview, places to do more training and to grow. Because again, like being at the top of the counseling pyramid means, where else do you go
Yeah.
when you're struggling? And please know that we are human too, and we struggle.
And it's
So
isolating. I
yeah,
think
it's
of it like
isolating.
private practice. I was so isolated in private practice. It was
Yeah.
awful. Clinically, it was awful because I was never used to that. I was always used to functioning in a team. And so, and then becoming a supervisor on top of that, absolutely. It was incredibly isolating. And good luck finding a consult group somewhere. It was just, I'm like, why is this so hard? And so then that raised the imposter syndrome for as a new supervisor so much, because you just suddenly wondered like, oh, I guess if no one else is in like consultation, then like they've figured all the things out. And so my idea for wanting some because I'm not sure must mean that like I'm not even ready to do this work instead of it
Right.
being, no, that's the normalized way of doing work. Like you're doing what you're supposed to do. It's the system that's not set up for you to do that, not that it's something with you.
Right. Right. Exactly. So that's really, that whole idea drives me, even more now than my practice. I mean, I love having a practice, and I love doing the work with families, and I will continue to always do that. That is a major part of my being and my career. And I'm very dedicated to this idea of clinical supervision, and of course our podcast, which is super, super fun. And
Yeah.
this idea of of building the legacy. I'm super dedicated to that idea.
So what are the future things that you can share, either that have recently been implemented into the directory or that are coming that can be announced?
Yeah. So two major things are, an opportunity for case consultation a couple different times a month for members of the directory. So that's going to be a really big thing, and we're going to be partnering with a couple organizations to do that together. So that's going to be really valuable opportunity for people to be able to get together and have a real opportunity with some experts to be able to do case consultation. And then I am working with PESI on a desktop companion for supervisors. That's going to be really, really cool, because, one of the things that I think I hear, maybe I read in social media and hear on a daily basis, is like, do you have paperwork for this? Do you have the
Yep.
contract for this? How about, can I get this? Like, do you have a framework for this kind of thing? Do you have, like, how do I do this vignette? Like, all the
Where do I
all
find
the
an
stuff.
ethical vignette to
If
use
you
in
could
group?
just have it right next to you, so when you're in supervision, you could just flip
Yes.
to it. That's what we're creating. And it's not
Yeah.
going to come out, it won't be published this summer. It will be published sometime, I think, this year, early next year, but we're working on the draft of that over the summer. And so that's going to be really, really fun, because that's going to be something that I need, and it's something that I wish I would have had. And it's
Yeah.
very driven by theory, but not going to be theory heavy.
Good. But
So,
it's something that can be standardized in some ways that
and
will really help to make sure that, you know, I guess that, that things are done in a like to fidelity, and that's the whole part of that, is to be able to have the oversight and to get the best of the best and put the things there, and iron sharpens iron like all day long. And
right,
so that preserves capacity, which is my theme in life
right.
now,
And so
is working smarter, not harder.
Yeah. So finally having sort of an essentials guide that is just something that you can have with you, that just kind of gives you all that stuff in one place. And that
Nice.
is going to be really great. So yeah, so I'm looking, so those are things that I'm working on right now that are going to be really exciting that I'm putting out there. So yeah, so those are CSD sort of supported projects that I'm working on. So we'll
And
see how
then
those.
what is happening well, before I switch to that, I did want to ask, as far as the CSD, what has been the hardest part of that journey and the creation of that? Because that's a huge undertaking. Like, I could see a lot of people, including myself, seeing a problem and going, I can't believe no one's thought of this. Like, this needs to be a thing. I should create that. And then go, that's a lot of work. I
Yeah.
don't know that I'm the one. You know what I mean? There's something between I know that you understood the assignment. I know you did. And yet you still went and did it anyway. So what was the hardest part? Was it the assignment itself, or something unexpected?
Yeah, well, so when you sort of cross over that like knowing doing gap, so like when you're on the other side and you've done the doing part,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's the sticking with it and not quitting part. That's
Uh,
the hard thing. Like it would be really easy for me right now to be just like, screw it. Like it's not like there aren't 1,000 people in the directory, so I should just quit. Like
uh,
it's really hard. I should quit.
so it's like the house that gets framed, and you get excited because the walls go up and the framing goes up and you can see the vision coming to life. And then all of a sudden you show up day after day, just like you did in framing, but there's nothing happening. And you're like, I
Right.
don't
Or
even think
all your
anybody's paying attention to
contractors
this house.
go bankrupt or whatever. None of them show up, like you can't. Right. I mean, like, yeah, it's not that.
Everything slows down.
Right. And
Kind
it's
of
not
like a
that there
business
isn't
that hits $1
support.
million. Once it hits a million, it's all running up that hill, but it hits 1 million. And from 1 to 3 is like crazy level, like
Yeah. It's kind of
slow.
like anything that has momentum, like once when you start a project, you are excited, like anything, like you're excited, but you're slogging up the hill.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel any startup, like you slog through the startup, and we are in the slog. But
Mm-hmm.
also, here's the reality. This is not my full time work.
Yeah.
It can't be, because
Right.
if it was my full time work, I'd have to make full time money from it.
That's right. Yeah.
And I have to do a full time something else, which is
Mm-hmm.
also a private practice business that has to also feed and employ other people.
Yeah.
So they depend on that too. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 situation. Like I have to make that work.
And you're
Plus
doing
this
this
other
on
thing.
your own private funding. You know what I mean? Like in the corporate world, we already know they would have a lot of other people's money tied into that. And so of course they would make that move a little differently, but you also lose a lot in those processes.
Right.
And I think that there's something to be said for someone who allows the slog and the slow and stays the course for the sake of the vision itself and holding that vision in the frame that it was intended, versus allowing too many people to come into that just to move it faster at the risk of losing that. And
Right.
so I think as clinicians, that's like something that we do well in the business world that they could learn from us a little more from.
Yeah.
Um, but in that way, have you been approached by people for partnerships or joint efforts where there would be, I'm taking this course, so these things are fresh on my mind from a business standpoint, like where there would be compatibility, where they may have something you don't have, you have something they don't have, that that you've turned down or considered or just didn't feel right?
Yeah, there have been a couple opportunities that we've turned down where they've said, would you be willing to build your directory out so it would kill someone else's business?
Oh,
And I was like, no.
like that was what was said.
Yeah, like that would kill this other XYZ business. Like, would you be willing to build it so it could be a competitor to XYZ? And I was like, no, I'm not really willing to do that. First of all, I'm not interested in building it to do that. Like,
So
that's
you
not the
want a
point,
differentiation model.
right? Like, it's not the point of this. I don't want to do that. And I would much rather build it to do it just what it's doing
Mm-hmm.
and join with that person to extend the services that we're both doing. So no, I don't want to do that. So that was a couple different conversations have been like that with big companies whose vision is to just suck up all the stuff, right? So those big companies were like,
Oh
"Hey,
yeah, to make all the money. Yep.
would you be willing to join with us? We'll give you money to build out your thing to then kill that other thing." Like, I don't want to do that. So
Good
those were
for
a couple no
you.
goes, which could have been very, very exciting and lucrative opportunities, but it just didn't make sense. So then we risk potentially losing out in the end. That might be the case.
Yeah, but you know
It
what? You
might be
go
the
down if you do, you go down with your dignity
That's kind of the
and
way it will, right. That's the
yes,
possibility. But
and
I
your
also
character
know that,
intact and your values. Like, and
well,
you
and the
can't.
other thing I know for sure is that those big companies also don't have me,
That's
or
that.
and don't
That's
have
it.
people like me. They don't have us.
They don't
So
have your
you look at
network.
these big companies don't have, you know, the intellectual properties that we have in terms of our experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there's a couple organizations that I could reach out to that I have not. And I can't explain why I haven't, because I don't actually have an explanation. And that's a little imposter syndrome of my own that I have to work through.
We
And
should like
so
work on that offline then. Like that
I
should
know
be
I need to
fun.
work through it. It's a matter of feeling ready, and I
I
don't know why I
understand
don't
that.
feel ready. I just need to say, look, here we are. This is what I need from you, and this is what we could do. And I just, I feel like I have one shot. And if I shoot my shot and they say no, then I'm screwed forever. And I need to remember that it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Like, they could say no now, and then they could come back and say yes later.
That's
Um,
right.
but
And
anyway,
that process itself could lend value and ideas, or the feedback, even if given any feedback, could really shape it. Or maybe, I have ideas. I always have ideas. I'm like, maybe you just need to Shark Tank that with me and a bunch of other people and let us like be that opposing. And then you kind of get the implicit, start working on that implicit experience of doing it and stating it and seeing what you would want to do different, or getting feedback and
yeah,
just prepping along the way. But I also understand that idea of like when you know that where something can be, and it's not quite there yet, but it might be close, and you feel for yourself that the value that would be seen would be better if you could just kind of get one or two more things going. I do understand kind of like the time part of like holding out on that too. So if it's a little bit of each, you know that's
there's always
understandable. But yeah,
something.
at some point got to pull it, got to go for it. Got to go for it. So then switching more away from that, like what are some Dr. Amy Parks projects that are just
Dr.
you?
Amy Parks, or just good old Amy Parks?
Either. Either. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, Dr. Amy Parks projects, like you and I have been talking about, definitely wanting to write a book on leadership, on the idea of the brain and leadership. So the brain and leadership at some point is a direction that I want to go in, which is something we haven't really even talked about. But the everyday mind is my jam, and anything brain related is totally my thing. And I want to spend more time like around the water and like do more like hanging out, like, I don't know, by the water, not necessarily like the beach, but like lakes. And I have 3 grandkids, so I like to hang with them too. It's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of your hobbies? What are things that you do if you're not just playing with grandkids or hanging around the hobbies? Like what are those secret things that maybe people don't know about you that they would kind of be
Uh-huh.
surprised about?
Well, let's see. So I'm an okay, I will tell you. So my husband has gone to the Indy 500 for the last 40 years.
Wow.
And I am an Indy 500 fan. So I have not gone for the last 40 years, but I have gone for the last 20. So, so that what people wouldn't know that about me. I'm an Indy 500 fan. So I'm a car racing fan. That's odd, I guess.
Totally didn't
Um,
see that.
yeah, didn't see that coming, huh? Let's see. I'm not a crafter, but like I like crafting. Uh, I like being outside, like gardening and stuff like that is pretty fun for me. I don't know if there's like an odd, something like odd
But you
about
do
me.
cook. You've cooked.
I
Like, you
like
just
to
whip
cook.
things up and you don't even think about it. And for me, it feels like the worst chore ever. And you're like, I'll just take this extra thing here and whip this up into this. And I'm like, that's great of you. Like, I'm in a work mode and I just am annoyed I need to eat right now.
I do like to cook. I do like to cook. Let's see what else. I just like being. I really do like being around the water. I like knowing people that have boats. I don't want a boat,
Oh,
but I like knowing the people that have boats. So,
ah,
and I like being on the water. I rowed crew when I didn't row in college, but when I graduated, I rowed a little in college. And then when I graduated from college, I rowed as an adult. My dad was a rower, so I really
oh,
like that. It's fun.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like in your DNA. So that's your calm place.
Exactly. Exactly.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you letting us interview you. Well, me, but I say us because I did offer, and other people may send questions in, and there may be a part two. So just
Fun.
in case there is, I know I think that would be fun. So if anyone is tuning in, make sure that you share, like, subscribe, do all the podcasty things, all the YouTube things. Share it with all your friends. Write into us. Tell us what you want to hear. And we will get your feedback and incorporate it. And stay tuned for our next episode. And until then, just remember, this is your one-stop shop for all things supervision.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.